reason we never found Jack the Ripper, and the reason that these ultra-violent murders started and stopped so suddenly, was because Jack the Ripper was a French serial killer. Marie Renault, I'm sorry we don't have a better photo of her. Time of her murder, she was 40 years of age and a member of the demi-monde, term coined by Alexandre Dumas fille, to describe the half-world that courtesans lived in. It is believed that Jack the Ripper tried to target sex workers. 4 of the canonical 5 victims of Jack the Ripper were about 40 years of age. Only Mary Jane Kelly was younger. These 3 women were all murdered on one night as they lay sleeping in one house on the Rue Montagne. It was a much nicer neighborhood than Whitechapel. Courtesans of the demi-monde could often afford to keep their own apartment. Marie Renault was known to be a highly successful and highly sought-after courtesan. Annette was her live-in servant, her housekeeper. Marie-Louise was only a child. She was believed to be the daughter of Annette. In part because this is such a lovely neighborhood, and in part because it also involved the murder of a child, 19th century Paris and their newspapers could talk of nothing else. Most importantly, they demanded justice from the police, because it turns out there was actually a string of unsolved murders of sex workers across all of France at the time. The pressure was on, and the police responded by arresting this man, Henri Pranzini, an Egyptian gigolo and a convenient scapegoat. Until his final moments, his head on the block of the guillotine, Pranzini never admitted that he did these killings. Pranzini's trial was a circus of speculation and reporting. Police tried to pin any unsolved murder that they could on Pranzini. This book is an excellent history of the Pranzini trial and how very biased it was. But it also lists many unsolved sex worker murders that he was accused of committing that could not be pinned on him because he had ironclad alibis. Using this book and French newspapers, I have been compiling a list of unsolved sex worker murders in the late 19th century. This list can only include murders where the body was found. In 1888, there were no passports, and being a sex worker, even in France in the 19th century, was not a career you wished to advertise. Generally, when a woman of the demi-monde went missing, it was simply assumed that she had returned to the countryside under a false name to start her life over. It would be the perfect cover-up for murder as long as you had a great place to hide the bodies. Et oui, Paris can provide. These are the catacombs of Paris. Quite literally millions of bodies that had to be relocated to the southern arrondissements of Paris as Paris was growing. Those bodies all remain stacked and buried underneath Paris to this day. There are still some secret access points. You of course can go on an official tour. There's people trying to access it illegally just to explore. These are the forums of casebook.org, a site dedicated to discussing Jack the Ripper. And this is the thread on the Paris torso mystery of 1886. This thread was started by researcher Charlie, also known as Fabrice Paulin. On the night of August the 3rd, 1886, to the morning of August the 4th, one body with its limbs rest apart at the joints was found in 3 different locations of Montrouge. Each of these stars represents where one portion of the body was found in a parcel. Although the head to this body was missing, it was very clear this was a woman. First, that the body was torn apart at the joints was important to me because it seemed as if they were attempting to avoid damaging the bones. Because if you wanted to hide a body amongst all of these bones, the bones would have to be intact so that you could stack them and they would blend in. Fabrice Paulin also mentioned that the body had been washed in phenol, that is, carbolic acid. In the 19th century, carbolic acid was used for multiple purposes. Most famously, it was used in surgery to prevent wound infection. But it was also used in art supplies, in sewage treatment, and also as a deodorant. That is, you would spray it on the corpses of decaying animals to prevent them from stinking. And the third thing that Paulin mentioned that stood out to me is that the Petit Sancho railway line had a cave-in. That little belt railway runs through Montrouge. And even to this day, it is one of the best access points for getting down to the catacombs. And so I had to ask Paulin if he had started researching this connection. I was delighted when he replied because he took this very seriously and began researching it almost immediately. Also, I could be reading this wrong, but I think he just happened to have maps of the catacombs, like, in his house. which officially makes him an awesome person. When he laid the two maps together, he noticed that at two of the sites there were only about 100 meters from an entrance point to the body's dropped location. And in the third spot, there were only 3 or 4 meters from the two. Here's his map in more detail. Each of the stars is a body part found, and then the arrows point to an entrance to the catacombs. This one's very close indeed. So to recap, in August of 1886, a murderer failed to be able to drop a body here. It's possible that he then decided to leave these bodies here in March of 1887. Then a huge trial broke out, and police were everywhere across the streets, scouring it and watching carefully for the murders of any sex workers so that they didn't look even more foolish. What if on August 31st, 1887, an innocent man was executed for a murderer's crimes? But the press was still hounding the police about all these unsolved murders, and so another trial broke out where Prado was accused of killing this sex worker. Would you then go stay with your good friend Walter Seickert, who was fluent in French, who claimed to know who Jack the Ripper was, who painted Jack the Ripper's bedroom, and said that he rented the room that Jack the Ripper had stayed in? And would you make your first kill in London on August 31st, 1888, exactly a year after the man had been executed for your crime? You'd have to have a pretty sick sense of humor to do something like that.